type of anti-Putin propaganda that people seem to swallow wholesale, and it's quite amazing to watch, but it is a phenomenon that's occurring. So I think the only conclusion that that seems possible is that the apathy, in fact, it works exactly in the opposite direction to what you're suggesting, Sea Devil. I think it works towards getting people to just go along with whatever war is presented to them. Now, there was an important point in which that did not happen, which was last year's run-up to the invasion of Syria, which did not happen because there was a mass public outcry against it, and people were flooding their Congress critters' voice boxes with protest, and people were spilling out onto the streets. That's the first time we've seen that in a number of years, to that degree anyway, and it did, at least partially, I mean, I'm sure there were many other factors going on behind the scenes, but at least partially did contribute to the fact that we did not go into Syria with bombs blazing at that time. So there is hope, but unfortunately I don't think apathy is the hope, and so I think still, it falls to us, the burden of all of us out there, to spread this message of the real agenda and what's really going on, because people, again, are ultimately most likely to be motivated by self-interest, and if we can explain that it is certainly not in their self-interest to go along with this global war agenda, then we are at least potentially counteracting some of that apathy. All right, next, we're going to switch back to the mailbag, and we're going to go to an email from Anja, who writes, "When I first discovered your website some years ago, I noticed right away that you were not on Facebook. Today you are still not on Facebook. Pourquoi?" Well, thank you for that, Anja. In fact, this is, again, one of those questions that I've received from a few different people in the last few weeks specifically. I'm not sure why these types of questions congregate in one time period, but at any rate, yes, I am not on Facebook. I can't say I never have been. I was briefly on Facebook back in 2007, I believe, because I wanted to check out what this phenomenon was all about that all of my friends were talking about, and I almost immediately deleted my Facebook and was never back since, because I understood how fundamentally creepy Facebook is. And that was even around the time of the start of the Corbett Report, before I was even well researched into these areas, but I immediately understood what was creepy and not right about this. But this has been said in many different ways. I've had different media out there talking about this. I'll refer people, for example, to a Last Word video report I did called Facebook and the End of Privacy. But there are many different ways to talk about why Facebook is fundamentally wrong and creepy, and why it's an intelligence operation and all of this. But let's go to a video that, in fact, I think is at least 7, maybe 8 or 9 years old by now. It's definitely outdated in terms of its specific information, but I think the general point that it makes is still worth listening to.
The first venture capital money, totaled at $500,000, came to the Facebook from venture capitalist Peter Thiel, founder and former CEO of PayPal. He also serves on the board of radical conservative group Vanguard PAC. Further funding came in the form of $12.7 million from venture capital firm Excel Partners. Excel's manager, James Breyer, was former chair of the National Venture Capital Association. Breyer served on the National Venture Capital Association's board with Gilman Louie, CEO of In-Q-Tel, a venture capital firm established by the Central Intelligence Agency in 1999. This firm works in various aspects of information technology and intelligence, including, most notably, nurturing data mining technologies. Breyer has also served on the board of BBN Technologies, a research and development firm known for spearheading the ARPANET, or what we know today as the Internet. In October of 2004, Dr. Anita Jones climbed on board BBN along with Gilman Louie. But what is most interesting is Dr. Jones' experience prior to joining BBN. Jones herself served on the board of directors for In-Q-Tel and was previously the Director of Defense Research and Engineering for the U.S. Department of Defense. Her responsibilities included serving as an advisor to the Secretary of Defense and overseeing the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This goes farther than just the initial appearances. DARPA shot to national fame in 2002 when knowledge of the existence of the Information Awareness Office came to light. The IAO stated its mission was to gather as much information as possible about everyone in a centralized location for easy perusal by the United States government, including though not limited to internet activity, credit card purchase history, airline ticket purchases, car rentals, medical records, educational transcripts, driver's licenses, utility bills, tax returns, and any other available data. All of the above raises more questions than answers. Perhaps if the Facebook wishes to stay ethically sane, it should enact a policy. What happens in the Facebook stays in the Facebook.
Alright, so as I say, the information on that video may be a bit outdated, but I think the general point is very much to the point, and I think that Facebook fundamentally is nothing more than a data mining trap, and it gets progressively creepier over the years, the various things that they've done to try to invade more and more on the personal privacy of their users and to exploit that for not only economic gain, which I think is the obvious thing that we can point to, but I think that the question of the way that these types of social media cooperate with intelligence agencies is an extremely important one, and one that I hope is not too conspiratorial for the mainstream now that we've had at least some of the revelations that we've had in recent years about the ways that the NSA and other agencies like that are acting. So this is why I'm not on Facebook, and I never will be again, at any rate, and I'm not planning to be. I'm sure it would be a good way to spread this information to more new users, but at a certain point you just have to draw the line, and that's where I do draw that line. But that does, of course, raise the question of why I'm on YouTube, why I'm on Twitter, why I have a Google Plus account, and that's a good question to raise. And ultimately, again, it's a calculation of, is this going to be effective for me to reach out to that matrix and grab people out of it? And ultimately, for me, I have made that calculation that certainly YouTube is one of those vehicles that I use because it is extremely effective in getting the word out to a wider audience than I ever possibly could without it, which goes towards this next question from David, who writes, with Google constantly trying to beat their dead horse, aka Google+, would it be wise to use alternatives like Dailymotion, Blip, or other alternatives to the colonoscopy YouTube is becoming? Thank you for the question, David, and extra points for using the word colonoscopy. You're exactly right. I mean, there needs to be a significant alternative to YouTube for so many reasons, but because, I mean, obviously they can and have many times in the past taken down entire accounts of, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, hundreds of videos, millions and millions of views. They've just taken accounts down, sometimes with little or no explanation, and have only reversed that when thousands and tens of thousands of outraged YouTube users have complained about that. So, I mean, obviously, any information you're putting up on YouTube is not safe. It's not your own. It's not there forever. I think you should always, of course, have backups of all the data you're putting up there. And we do need a viable alternative to YouTube. But it is a question of viable. I think that's the key word. And over the years, I've seen a few different alternative type YouTube sites, specifically for alt media, come and go. For example, there was Rational Veracity, which I was promoting on this podcast at one point, that went under because it just simply couldn't be maintained. There weren't enough users, and there wasn't enough traffic, and there wasn't enough ad revenue for the person who was running it. And ultimately, it just failed. And that's going to be the case for a lot of these sites, because video sharing platforms, especially, if they're going to work, have to have a pretty large user base and have to have some sort of revenue, because it's extremely expensive to run those types of servers. So it's very difficult to do that from an alt perspective. And even if you look at some of the alternatives, I've tried Blip. They ultimately ended up removing my channel, as well as pretty much every other alt media channel that I know of, like James Seven Pilato's Media Monarchy channel and all of the other channels, because they didn't conform to the community guidelines or the type of direction they're taking Blip in, or whatever it is. So Blip went to the wayside. I've tried Vimeo, but you can only upload, I think, 3 videos a week unless you buy an upgraded account, which I suppose I could do, but again, it just seems somewhat silly and pointless, because I have all that functionality in YouTube. I don't really delude myself that it's any different. Dailymotion, I've had an account there. It's cumbersome to upload. All of these things are not ideal solutions, and I think that the number one point of why I'm still on YouTube is that it is where the people are, and it's one of those chicken and egg questions. How do we move the people without moving ourselves off YouTube? And if we move ourselves off YouTube, we'll lose access to all those people that we want to convince to move off YouTube. So it is, I mean, it is a conundrum, and I don't pretend that it's an easily resolvable one. But here we are. So I'm always open to suggestions and ideas, but so far, I think that it just makes more sense to be in that GooTube matrix. And I'm in it personally because I myself am consciously making the conscious decision to go in there to put this type of information out there. I certainly don't recommend anyone to create a YouTube account or a Google Plus account in order to just browse or use YouTube normally. I mean, if you're going to put out truthful information, this is the place to do it, and you can potentially reach millions of people. I have nearly 20 million video views on YouTube right now, which is just an astounding figure, and one that I never would have even approached if I had confined myself to Daily Motion or Blip or what have you. So again, it's a place to reach out and to hopefully unlock some minds and get some people, get some minds opening and flowing, and get people out of that matrix. So it's a tightrope to walk, and at some point I think there will have to be an exodus from YouTube. It's just a question of when and how. And maybe that will be decided for me when they suddenly yank my account for no good reason. All right, well, moving right along, we'll go to Art, who has an important question. He writes, a bunch of people that I have a continuing argument about 9/11 with... and specifically WTC Building 7. Sorry, that sentence is incorrect. Okay, anyway, they claim the building came down due to structural damage to the building from the North Tower. I'm enclosing a picture that does show damage to the corner of WTC 7. My argument is that from the picture there's no evidence of structural damage, and secondly, if that was the cause of the collapse, why didn't WTC 7 come down that morning, and since the damage to the building was asymmetrical, then why did the building come down symmetrically 8 hours later? Finally, if structural damage did bring down the building, then why was it not given as the cause in the NIST report? Okay, a very important question. As I say, this is important because this is something that, it's an old canard that continues to come up. But I think the key point is what you mentioned at the end of that question, Art, which is that this is not in the NIST report. The NIST final report was released in November 2008. And I'll put a link into the press release so you can go and download the report itself and watch the video presentation that NIST gave at that time. But the key sentence from that press release about the final WTC7 investigation is, quote, heating of floor beams and girders caused a critical support column to fail, initiating a fire-induced progressive collapse that brought the building down. It was fire that, according to the official story, brought the building down, not the structural damage. Ultimately, NIST concluded that structural damage did not have anything to do with the actual initiation of that collapse. So that's an important part of this, because again, people will bring up that photo. Still, it continues to circulate, even though there are questions about that photo, and I will throw a link into a 9/11 blogger thread about that photo and debunking that photo. Unfortunately, every single photo in that 9/11 blogger thread has since been removed. It's 7 years old. All of these files have been deleted, or they're old or out of date, or the links aren't working anymore. So unfortunately, this is another thing to keep in mind about the web, is that just because it's up on the web today does not mean it will be up on the web tomorrow or 7 years from now, when it might be useful. But anyway, at any rate, I was on that thread 7 years ago. I do remember it, and it certainly, at the time, I remember they showed the comparisons of different photos of WTC7, etc. And the 25% scooped out photo is at the very least an optical illusion that's generated by some of the smoke that's going on in that picture, and at very worst an outright forgery. So at any rate, we can talk a little bit about the history of that photo and how it was used. I'll put in a link to 911debunkers.blogspot, which talks about that claim and how it was first posited in Appendix L of the 2004 Progress Report on WTC7. Shyam Sunder mentioned it in the Popular Mechanics debunking article in 2005. It was eventually retracted, and now it's not even mentioned at all in the NIST final report. So that goes some ways towards telling how important that structural damage was, i.e. not even NIST claims it was important. So that's the first thing to bring up to your friends. NIST doesn't say that had anything to do with the collapse. Secondly, I think we should look at what NIST actually does say brought down the WTC7, the fire-induced collapse. And a couple of things to say on that. First of all, please remember that the model that they used to model the initiation of that collapse, and the model itself is just ridiculous when you look at the visualization of it and expect to believe that that somehow explains the full progressive, well, beginning at freefall gravitational acceleration collapse of the building. It does not go any way towards that, I think. But at any rate, the data behind the model is completely 100% classified. Literally classified. The public is not allowed to see it. And once again, this is a point I make in the 9/11 conspiracy theory video. I'll throw the link in here as well to the actual response that NIST gave to a Freedom of Information Act request for the data that went into the building of that model, in which they say that it might jeopardize public safety if the public know about what data they used in that model. Therefore, NIST will not release the data. So that model is worth exactly what goes into it. And since we are not allowed to see what magic pixie dust went into the back end of that model, it is worth absolutely nothing. It tells us nothing whatsoever about the collapse of that building. So for a true, really in-depth investigation of what NIST claims about WTC7 and why it's a lie, I will wholeheartedly recommend the work of Kevin Ryan, who has really done the yeoman's work of really dissecting the WTC7 report and really exposing it for what it is. He did an interview on the Mind Renewed podcast recently that I'll link people to, which is, I think, a pretty good conversation about the claims about the WTC collapses. And I will also include a link to a pretty comprehensive 1-hour video presentation of Kevin Ryan's presentation about the collapse of WTC7 and what NIST claims about it. That, again, it's pretty thorough and it goes through it point by point, and I think does a very good job of debunking some of the NIST silliness. I mean, it's just there are stronger words to be used, but let's keep this family friendly. So, yes, absolutely, 100%. There are good arguments to be made why NIST is full of it on WTC7, and the structural damage has nothing to do with it, even by NIST's own investigation. So again, a very important question, especially coming up to the 9/11 anniversary, where these types of questions will probably be kicked around once again. But moving on to a, well, perhaps related question from Dan, who writes, why does Amy Goodman not say she was at Building 7, report about Building 7, or support 9/11? Can you ask her? Thank you for that, Dan. Yes, many people might not know this, but Amy Goodman was there live on the scene when WTC7 collapsed. There is footage of her there, so you can see that online. So you think she might be a little bit curious as to what happened while she was there on the ground in New York that day, but well, maybe not, because of course Democracy Now! Does not cover 9/11 truth. It had a debate back in the day, but really, other than that, it hasn't covered this issue. It has not been an ongoing concern for Democracy Now! Democracy Now! Does not talk about it. So the question is, why does Amy Goodman not talk about it? And can I ask her about this? Well, of course not, because I have absolutely no connection to Amy Goodman, and she wouldn't give me the time of day at all, because who am I? I'm just some blogger on the internet. But that question has actually been given to her many times by many different people, with We Are Change and without We Are Change. There have been lots of people who've put this question to Amy Goodman, so let's go to the video footage.
I wanted to ask your comment. What do you think about World Trade Center Building 7, your opinion?
I think it needs to be further investigated.
One of my colleagues asked you a while ago what you thought about World Trade Center Building number 7, and you said you thought it needed further investigation. And I was hoping you could let us know why you think it needs a further investigation.
I think everything needs further investigation.
Specifically Building 7, anything about it?
I think that, I think we have to get a complete investigation of what actually took place.
So you don't feel like 9/11 was completely investigated by the 9/11 Commission?
I think it does need, I don't think the 9/11 Commission did.
You know, the group of citizen journalists who, actually put together a lot of the independent investigation that you support on 9/11 has been attacked, ignored by The Nation magazine, by Mother Jones. What do you think about that?
I just think that it needs to be investigated, and we, and we'll continue to look at the issue. But I have to.
All right, but Amy,
okay.
it has been
you.
investigated, and now we have peer-reviewed journal papers of the evidence that the buildings were blown up. So now it's time for you to do your job and have the people on, please.
All right, there you go. Make of those profusions and evasions what you will, and I think that Amy said some things at some opportune times to get people out of her face, and clearly has no intention whatsoever of following up on them. So I think the real point of this is, why do we care what Amy Goodman thinks? I mean, obviously she has an audience she could expose to this information, but it's not going to happen. I think after 13 years of waiting for Amy Goodman or some other reporter to descend from the heavens and offer this information to the public, I think at this point we can pretty much determine who's going to talk about this topic and who isn't. And Amy Goodman isn't. So I think we should stop giving up hope that Democracy Now! Or the Young Turks or any of these types of quote-unquote alternative outlets are actually going to do any investigative work whatsoever on this issue. And instead, we're going to have to take it again into our own hands because, again, as the commander-in-chief once said, we are the change we're looking for. So stealing some of the thunder, I think, from We Are Change itself in the process with that phrase. But anyway, again, I just don't think we can sit around and twiddle our thumbs and wait for this to be covered in one of those quote-unquote alternative media outlets, because, again, it doesn't even mean that these are evil people plotting to scheme and help the New World Order and take over the world. These are just career journalists who know that their career would be over if they talked about this too deeply, so they don't. And again, that's the way it works. So let's stop thinking that it will ever be otherwise. But again, this is a new paradigm, a new era. We have open source journalism. We are blazing a new trail. We do not need Amy Goodman. We do not need Democracy Now! We do not need any of these outlets. And that's not to say that we can't celebrate the good work that they do and use the good work that they do. They do some good work, so let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but let's just not rely on them for reporting about 9/11. Or some of the other topics that we talk about here. All right, speaking of which, let's move on to a completely different topic by a question that we received via SpeakPipe, the application that allows you to record a question for me. And this one comes from Tony.
I wonder whether it's possible for you to comment on the inclusion of secret societies into all forms of power, i.e. the financial powers run by secret society members like the Rothschilds. The media, look at the logos run by secret society members. Governments, clearly run by secret society members. So, with this in mind, it would appear that if we need to know the truth about our situation, it would be the secret societies and their agenda that we would be looking at. So, anyway, there's my deal. I would ask you, if possible, to do an article or a piece on the secret societies and your point of view.
All right, thank you for that, Tony. And don't worry, there are numerous resources on the occult and secret societies up on CorbettReport.com. I'll just run through a few of them. Of course, we've talked about the Bohemian Grove back in episode 42 of the podcast. Episode 93 was about Skull and Bones. Episode 137, we talked specifically about signs, symbols, sigils, logos, and those types of occultic references in the mainstream. There was an episode of Corbett Report Radio on religion and the New World Order, and I did an entire eye-opener series at the beginning of 2013 talking about secret societies, and culminating in an episode that I hope people will watch or rewatch called Solutions, Defeating the Secret Societies. So this is clearly something that we've talked about many times. I think for my latest thinking on this matter, probably the best place to go would be the recent Beard World Order episode on how Bilderberg works and institutional analysis, where I put forward what I really think these secret societies are, what they're functioning to do. And I think there are multiple levels and layers depending on the audience for this information, right down from the general dumbed-down public all the way up to the actual members of these secret societies themselves. And I think even within the secret societies, there's stratification between those members on the periphery, those members towards the interior, and then those in the very center who are puppeteering all of them. I think there's a lot going on here, and a lot of it plays on psychological factors. The fundamental key psychological factor that is very very effective, because I think it works on almost everyone, is the idea of holding out information on people and suggesting that they can get more if they work harder and work farther and work their way up the ladder. You can find out the truths, the hidden truths, the secret truths at the core of this. It doesn't even matter if those secret truths exist. Simply using them motivationally to keep people working towards your agenda can be exceptionally effective, and I think that's how a lot of these groups do work. And it's very, very insidious, because, again, so many people are motivated by curiosity. So I think there's a lot to be said. Again, there's a ton of different resources. I'll put those links that I mentioned specifically in the show notes so you can go and explore those issues. If anyone has any specific questions about any of these secret societies, I'd be happy to answer that.